Today I'm going to show you how I integrated a biometric lockbox inside a drawer with some internal LED lighting on this episode of Combs Design. This drawer is a small part of a set of nightstands I'm building for a friend of mine. And I have a whole video coming out on the entire build process of the nightstands, but in that video I won't really get into depth on how I built these drawers. So I'm still working on the nightstands, and get subscribed because that video is coming out soon, but I wanted to take a deep dive into these drawers because they have this really cool lockbox feature on them.
These drawers are built out of quilted maple, and luckily these pieces were wide enough I could yield 2 pieces from every board. The final dimension on my drawer boxes is 5/8 of an inch thick, and this is what the bloom slides I'm using calls for. I head over to the table saw after I get my pieces to rough size and add a dado in the bottom that will accept a slightly undersized plywood panel. From here I can cut all my pieces to length and begin cutting my joinery. For joinery on most of my boxes I use a rabbeted corner. I use my dado blade to cut the joinery itself, and then I adhere everything with glue and I reinforce it with screws. The screws are less important in this joint, and they really provide a clamp while the glue is drying. The screw itself gets covered with a decorative dowel, and I'll show you that in a minute. To accommodate this decorative dowel, I drill in a recess in the corners of the boxes with a Forstner bit. The next portion of the build is to install an LED channel that lights up the inside of the lockbox in case you have to get into it at night. I dado a groove into the center divider of the drawer. This center divider separates the normal portion of the drawer from the lockbox portion of the drawer. I installed this aluminum strip that the LED sits inside. This allows for better heat dissipation and allows me to add a frosted diffusion cover over the LED strips. I go ahead and get all my wiring soldered onto the LED strip to prepare for assembly in the next step. Now when I assemble my box, I glue all my joints, and you'll see I reinforce them with screws. It's important to already have my wiring done at this point because I have a small hole in the bottom of the drawer box where I slip my LED wiring through that will later go to the power supply that sits on the back side of the drawer box, but I'll get into those details a little bit later. I finish assembly of my drawer box and go ahead and apply those screws in all of the corner holes. Next, I use a rabbeting bit to cut a recess for the lockbox top to sit into. In many situations, you would use this rabbeting bit and then clean up the corners with a chisel to square them off, but I actually liked the rounded look, so after I did this pass with the rabbeting bit, I ended up just making my top panel rounded, and I'll show you that here in a minute. To accommodate the bloom undermount slides, you have to cut these recesses in the back side of your drawer box. You can do this with a router, a hammer, a chisel, many different ways. The fastest and most efficient way, in my opinion, is to use the dado blade to quickly hug out all of the material. Next, I cut all of my decorative walnut plugs with this absolutely terrible Miles Craft plug cutting bit. This isn't an old bit or burnt out. This has burnt like this ever since day one of owning this bit, so if you have plug cutting bit recommendations, let me know below. I use Titebond Quick and Thick to put all my plugs in place. This glue dries very quickly and allows me to quickly follow up with a flush cut trim saw and get all of my decorative plugs cut flush. I sanded the whole box, and at this point I could HVLP on a lacquer finish. Next, I installed my bloom hardware in the cabinet's carcass itself. I also used this opportunity to install the locking mechanisms on the bottom of the drawer. If you like this content or you've learned something, consider hitting subscribe. That's the best way you can help me continue to make free content on YouTube, and it will also let you see the completion of this nightstand in an upcoming video. I glued up a walnut panel for the top of my lockbox and marked out how I wanted to round my corners. I did this by hand with the belt sander and got a really great result. To maintain a cleaner look on the top of this lockbox, I simply drilled out a 1-inch finger hole instead of using any sort of pull. I attached my surface mount hardware, and these are soft close mechanisms that mount on the surface of the drawer and the bottom side of the lockbox top. Next, I installed my DC power supply and soldered all of my wires together. The negative side of the light goes straight to this DC power supply, and the hot side is interrupted by a momentary switch that's activated when the lid opens and closes. I dress everything with heat shrink and snakeskin to make it look nice and professional. This is the momentary switch, and it goes on the inside of the lockbox. This switch turns the light on when the circuit is open, and when the circuit is closed and the lid is closed, it turns the light off. Next, I wired a power pass-through on the USB charger that's built into this nightstand. I simply modified the circuit board and added a pass-through that goes to the backside of this drawer box. Next, I mounted the biometric lock with the help of some 3D printed parts and chiseled out a recess for the strike plate. The strike plate that's included with this biometric lockbox didn't work in my specific application, so I 3D printed one. Finally, I sprayed adhered some black crushed velvet to this piece of foam and used it as a bottom pad in the lockbox. This simply completes the look and makes it look like a much more finished product.
So right here, this is the top of one of the walnut nightstands. It's not done yet, but here's the frame. I have this middle divider, and here's the drawer, and it still needs a drawer front. This has Bloom hardware in it, so it's push to open. And once it opens, there's this front compartment here with this back locked compartment. Now to open it, I simply use the biometric lock, and I can open this top lid, and you see it lights up with the internal LEDs. And to close it, it just has a soft close feature, so it slowly pulls itself closed and back into the locked position. When the client is ready to close this, they simply push the drawer closed, and it has the Bloom motion with the tip-on mechanisms, so it's push to open and slowly retracts itself closed.
Now, before I get hateful comments below, let me make it clear this is no replacement for a proper gun safe, so keep your guns away from kids, keep your money in the bank, and keep your flour in the kitchen.
Now you might be asking yourself how I got power to these internal LEDs, and no, I did not use a battery because I simply felt that the battery would have drained too quickly. What I did is I took the USB power that I'm building into here for charging for the client's phone, iPads, whatever, and I modified it so it would have a power pass-through. Now this USB charger sits in the back, and I modified it so a cable comes out of it to the back of this drawer where it hits the DC power supply and then runs through the drawer back inside into the lights. One technique I've been experimenting with that you'll see on this project and you'll see on a credenza that I'm building for a client is integrating wiring into the joints. I typically do this on dados, so what I can do is I can cut my dado groove, and then I can cut a secondary groove inside that to hide my cable path. Then I just take the cable out of the piece of furniture or out of the joint in a discrete place where the client will never see. In this case, I'm using the dado here that's holding this middle panel in, and the cable's coming out right below it. I dress it neatly with some snake skin and some zip ties and 3D printed zip tie holders and wire it all the way to the back of the drawer.
3D printing was extremely important on this build. I had to make custom mounting brackets for the biometric locks and a custom strike plate. In a typical application, you wouldn't need these, but because of this very specific application, I had to make some custom parts.
Thank you guys so much for sticking around and checking out this episode, but before you go anywhere, let's talk about this week's giveaway. My longtime subscribers will know about my partnership with the organization One Tree Planted, and you know that whenever I do a project with hardwoods, I donate hardwood, or trees planted rather, in the names of my subscribers. So leave a comment below letting me know what you think about this lockbox, maybe what you want me to build in the future, and one of those comments will be selected, and that person who left the comment will have 5 trees planted in their name with the organization One Tree Planted. So, give me your feedback below. Let me know what you thought. Thank you guys so much, and I will catch you on the next one.